If you don't know this one simple thing, you will always struggle in chess. You see, chess is a brutal game, but it can be so much easier if you understand where the pieces are supposed to go in each opening that you play. That is the lesson for this video, and we're using a recent game I played online to show it to you. All right, in the game, white opened 1e4, and I'm playing as black here. After e4, I went for the move e5, my typical response as black. Now we have knight f3, knight c6, and now here, the main moves for white are going to be bishop b5, the Roy Lopez, bishop c4, the Italian, d4, the Scotch, and knight c3, heading for the four knights game. All of these moves are playable, but instead of those, here white went for the move d3. Now, this move right here is just very, very passive. White's going for this light squared strategy, but the problem is his light squared bishop is stuck inside the pawn chain. This bishop here, it belongs on either c4 or b5 before white goes for the move d3. That is the first lesson. For example, white can go bishop c4, knight f6, d3, and the bishop here is outside the pawn chain. White still has the same light squared pawn strategy, but his pawns are outside the pawn chain, and his bishop is outside the pawn chain, and that makes all the difference. So here, white, he simply fails to understand where his pieces belong in the opening, and he will be brutally punished for it. White goes d3. I go knight f6. The knights in the open games almost always go to f6 and c6. Very standard stuff. White goes c4 now. Now, this move right here, it's not really a good idea. White, I think, is trying to be tricky, but this pawn, it almost always stays on c2 or goes to c3 to fight for d4 in the open games. Going to c4 like this, it gives up control of d4, and here black is very, very simple play. Now here's black. What should I be doing? Again, where do my pieces belong? This bishop, it needs to be outside the pawn chain, ideally on c5 or b4 before I go d6. With that in mind here, I simply go bishop c5. A very typical move in the open games, the best square for the bishop, and now I'm ready to go say d6 and castles, and again, I'm going to have a superior version of this identical pawn structure. All right, white goes knight c3, developing. I simply castle. A key idea in the open games, you want to castle your king, ideally on the king side, ASAP, as soon as possible. White goes bishop e2. Really a sorry place for the bishop, but where else can you go? And here I just go d6. And again, the position here is almost identical. However, I'm already castled, and my bishop is on the superior square c5 versus e2, and that already gives me a little bit of an edge as black. All right, now here, white castles, and in this position, I've got to find my plan. I've already castled king side, and now, how do I want to develop the queen side, and how should I start attacking in this game? Well, here I play the best move here. That is the move a5. Very often in the open games, you want to play a6 or a5 as black, giving your bishop on c5 a potential retreat square on a7 if it needs it. Beyond that, I'm also controlling b4, stopping any sort of b4 idea from white, and I'm gaining space on the queen side. Later in the game, I may even go a4 if the opportunity arises. Now here, white goes a4, and this move here is a little bit dubious. He's giving me control of b4 forever for these two pieces. Meanwhile, white, he can only control b5 with one piece. So here, the inclusion of a5 and a4 is definitely to my benefit here. All right, now, in this position, I should have realized already, as black, I have a little bit of an edge, and I should be playing for more here. I should be playing for maybe even a solid advantage, and the best way to do that is you start h6, controlling g5, and after, say, h3, you can actually just go bishop e6, intending knight d7 and f5. That would be the best way to apply maximum pressure on white's position. Now, I didn't do it in the game. Instead, I went for basically an equalizing option. That is knight d4. Now, there is nothing wrong with this move inherently. It's a very common idea in the open games. The point being, this knight goes to d4. You trade off at least one pair of minor pieces. Then you can go c6, controlling d5. Again, a very, very standard idea in the open games, especially in the Berlin defense to the Roy Lopez. However, here I could have played for more, so not a bad idea overall. All right, here, white, his best strategy is to make use of his bishop on e2, where it's stuck inside the pawn chain, and the way you do that, you trade here on d4, I trade back, and then white can actually go king to h1, intending f4, and white's gonna get some play here. I mean, the game is still roughly level, but white's doing a little better than he was just 2-3 moves ago. Now, instead of that, white here goes h3, squandering the chance to do that. I take on e2, knight takes, white takes back, and then here I just go rook to e8. A very simple move. The idea being later in the game, if the e-file opens up, the rook could be very strong on the e-file. For example, if I go c6, then d5, the e-file could open up, and therefore e8 is a pretty good square for the rook. All right, white here, he makes another big mistake. He really fails to understand where this bishop belongs in this position. He plays the move bishop g5. And now, white here is playing very, very fast. We're playing with a 2-second increment, meaning every time you make a move, you get 2 more seconds on the clock. Now, white here, he's playing super fast, but he's not playing good moves. I mean, why isn't white taking more time to think about his moves and to try to get a decent position? Now, here, instead of bishop g5, white probably should have gone bishop e3. E3 is a decent square for the bishop. It stops black's bishop on c5, and it offers a trade. And white would be relatively okay here. Now, instead, bishop g5 was played in the game, and here I just go h6, giving the bishop a question. Do you want to go back? Do you want to trade? Or do you want to retreat? Now here, if white trades, white is just giving up the bishop pair for essentially nothing. I take back with the queen. I'm doing outstanding here. I have 2 bishops. These 2 Bs are worth roughly half a pawn in most positions, and this one would certainly apply. I would be much, much better as black here. Now, if white retreated, say, bishop e3, it's not a bad idea. White would be doing okay, but then I get the move h6 in for free. But that is probably white's best option here. Now, the move white played in the game, bishop h4, is another critical mistake. Now, in the open games, somewhat shockingly, black very often can go h6 and then g5, chasing back this bishop, and that is what I did in the game. g5 chases back that bishop. It must go back to, say, g3, but from there, this bishop is completely misplaced. It's biting on granite. It's hitting e5, which e5 is just perfectly supported, and black's going to have an excellent game. For example, as black here, you can actually start an attack on the king side by going knight h5, threatening knight takes, white must go back, and then g4, intending h takes, bishop takes, and believe it or not, this is actually very, very good for black. Again, this bishop completely cut off. This one threatens to take on f3, damaging white's pawn structure, and beyond that, black can simply go, say, king h8, and then rook g8 with all of his pieces really, really lining up against the white king on the g2 square. So overall, that would have been white's best option after his mistake of bishop h4. But instead of that, white here actually took on g5 with the knight. He sacrificed the knight. What is white doing? I mean, he's wasted only 6 seconds on the clock racing into this, quite frankly, really terrible position. What is white doing? Well, let's find out. I take. White takes back. And now here, whenever one side gives up a piece for the pawn on g5 or g4, basically the one side who sacrificed the piece, they're going for the all-out attack. And all you have to do as the other side is just find a way to defend. And the best way to defend here is to bring more pieces into the defense ASAP, especially the queen. So here, how do I get my queen over to the defense of the king side? That is the big question. It turns out here, the simplest way to do it, and the one I found in the game, is rook to e6. Now, this move, it defends the knight and also frees up f8 for the queen. My plan is simple. Queen f8, then queen g7, hitting the bishop, and white here is down a piece. His pieces make almost no sense here. His knight is blocking the queen. The queen can't get over to the king side, and white's just going to be down material for no reason. Now, I do want to point out, if instead of knight takes, if white took with the bishop, this is a little more common. The idea being bishop takes, h takes, knight takes, and normally white's idea here is perhaps queen f3 and then g3. But whenever white takes with the bishop first and then the knight, there is this one simple trick you can play to pretty much shut down the attack immediately. It almost always works, and it works right here as well. The one move you want to know is so important is knight to h7. You retreat the knight, pressure white's knight, and free up f6 for the queen. And once you have your knight and the queen over here defending, it's almost impossible for the one side to checkmate you. So it's a very simple trick you should know for your own games. All right, back to the main game here. g5. Knight takes, h takes, bishop takes, rook e6, intending queen f8, then queen g7. That is my simple plan. This is where the pieces belong here. All right, knight g3. The idea being the queen can now enter the fight, but it's too little, too late. Queen f8, intending queen g7, and black here is just fine. Now white goes knight h5, no problem. Knight takes, queen g7 again. What can white possibly do? Not only that, white is going to be attacked very, very soon. My plan here is rook g6, and then look at this. Every single piece of mine, the rook, the queen, and the bishop, will all be lining up on the white king like this. And white is going to be in so much trouble. And all because he simply did not know where his pieces were supposed to go in the opening. A fatal mistake. All right, white goes king h1. A good move. Getting his king off the g-file. This g-file is just so booby-trapped right now. White has to get his king off the file. All right, here, rook g6. I slide over again, continuing the plan of just overloading everything on these two pawns right here in the white position. All right, white goes f4, trying to attack, trying to open up some lines, but I'm not amused. f6 drives back the bishop, and if the bishop moves, then after, say, bishop h4, then the pawn on g2 will fall as well, and that is just game over for white. There's no way to defend that. So instead, white here makes a very tricky move, h4. White here, he's starting to think. As you can see, I've finally caught up in the time controls. I have about 30 seconds more than my opponent, and my opponent here still playing relatively fast and still playing not the best moves. Kind of a weird combo, playing very, very fast, but not very good moves. All right, here, I take on g5, f takes, white takes back, f takes. Now here, I'm up two pieces, the two bishops. So all I have to do is basically bring out the remaining pieces, say this rook to f8, and I'm gonna be winning. So let's see how I do it. Bishop e6, rook f3, rook f8, classical chess. Bring all of the pieces into the attack and the defense. All right, now, what can white do? Well, in the game, rook g3 was chosen. If you trade rooks after, say, rook takes, then, king takes, black is going to be, he's just busted. There's no way to defend this. So instead, rook g3 played in the game, trying to keep the game complicated, not a bad idea. Now here, I go rook to f4. In my opinion, a pretty good move and laying a bunch of traps. Now, the computer says either, let's see, bishop f2 or queen to h7 are a little bit stronger, but I like my idea of rook f4, a good square for the rook, pressuring h4, locking the queen down to the defense of that pawn, and so on. Now here, white tries to make something happen, but he's just playing dubious move after dubious move. He goes d4. What's the idea? I take the pawn, and then white goes rook to a3. I suppose that was perhaps the idea. The rook lift on the third rank, not a bad idea, but here I just go queen to h7, offering the queen trade. The point being, if we trade queens, I win in the endgame, being up two pieces. But if he doesn't trade queens, let's say he goes back to, say, e2, I just take on h4 and I win a pawn. So white here, he's in trouble. What does he do? Well, he trades queens. I take back. Then he goes rook a to f3, trying to get rid of this rook, but I just take the pawn. Rook takes h4, winning yet another pawn in this position. All right, white goes rook h3, trying to defend, but this gives up the exchange. Bishop takes, g takes, and here, this pawn is hanging, but I don't want to allow any sort of rook f7 nonsense. Therefore, king g7 was my move. We have king h2, and now rook takes. Now white goes b4. White here is just starting to suicide some pawns, as we're going to see. A takes, a5, rook g6, c5. White is just trolling me at this point. He's literally trolling me in real time. He trolled me in the opening, playing a very weird opening. not knowing where his pieces were supposed to go, and now he's trolling me in the endgame. So D takes, A6, B takes, rook F5, rook takes, H4, and here, white just lets me checkmate him. Rook takes H4 is literally checkmate on the spot. So again, the key lesson from this game, you simply have to know where your pieces belong in the opening. In the opening, white went for the idea of the very fast D3, locking in his light squared bishop. Even if you don't play E5 as black, you simply have to know the best squares for your pieces based on the pawn structure and then get them there ASAP. White here violating basic opening principles and gets punished. My strategy is simple. Knight F6 and then bishop C5. Perhaps the best squares for all of these minor pieces in the open games for black. Now we have simple moves. White develops, he tries to castle, and then A5, locking down the queen side, and so on. And from here, black has so many ideas. And again, not to recap the entire video, but whatever openings you play, if it's E4, E5, it's black, like I play, if it's the Sicilian, if it's the Caro-Kann, the French, whatever it's going to be, you really need to understand in advance where your pieces should be going and where they belong based on the pawn structure that you have in that particular game. And if you can just find the best squares for your pieces and plump them there as soon as possible, you will win so many online games that way. It's such an easy way to destroy amateur players online, even players rated 1700, 1800, 1900 Elo. So many players just don't know this one simple rule in chess. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do me a huge favor, smash that like button and comment down below the one thing you learned from this video. I'm very curious what you guys got out of this. And beyond that, I wish you all the best in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. I hope you reach all of your goals, and I'll see you in the next video.